This is part 12 of my series on David Deutsch's book, The Beginning of Infinity. This is going to be the final part. The topic this time is misquotes. I discovered that there are a large number of misquotes in the book. I was pretty unhappy about this, and I'm going to end the series here. I wrote this blog post about it, which is in the description, where you can put in curie.us/2462, and that'll get you there. So there are a lot of misquotes. They often involve changing the words or a quote with no source that can be found and just doesn't seem to exist. So severe misquotes, not just punctuation changes or one-letter typos or other things like that, which also exist. So first misquote, Character of Physical Law, 1965 by Feynman. In a few cases, I brought up the books on screen. I'm going to show you a little bit of my research process. So for this one, DD changed some words in the quote, and we can search for it. So if I search for this, I think it's not going to work. Right, because he changed the wording, so it doesn't find it. But if you search with less words, fewer words, you can find things. So David quotes this part right here. It goes only until you discover it. I think there's an ellipsis, that's why. Okay, so he ends his quote here. So he's quoting this part with way fewer words. So he's starting in the middle of a sentence after semicolon in the second clause, and he just enters with no indication that he has skipped stuff. Here's the beginning of the paragraph, and yeah, we're just in the middle of stuff. But okay, that is a stylistic choice. Some style guides think that's okay. That you can just start wherever you want and end wherever you want with no indication. What is not a stylistic choice, however, is David quotes it as, there will certainly not be novelty. And it says in the book right here, there will certainly not be perpetual novelty. David simply cut a word out of the quote. You can't do that. It's not a correct quote. It's just wrong. There's no excuse. And then a little bit later, Feynman wrote, keep on going, and David changed it to keep going on. Again, it's just not acceptable. There's no controversy about this. It's just wrong. There was only one or two like this. You could maybe forgive him, but it is many, many like this, and there's something really broken going on there. And the misquotes do not seem random. They seem to frequently make the quote sound a bit nicer, like there's some sort of bias involved that's causing misquotes. Anyway, so that is the Feynman one. It doesn't match the book. The ellipsis skips quite a few sentences, which is something David does often, which I don't like when you're skipping into a different paragraph. Why is this not showing up? Oh, right, because I had a space on the end. So this is another thing David does. This is wrong. The sentence ends with a period, and David quotes to the end of the sentence, and then he puts an ellipsis. And what you're supposed to do is include the period and have 4 dots, not 3, because that shows that it was the end of a sentence, and then you also have an ellipsis, so you have the period and the ellipsis. You're not supposed to cut that period out. You could probably find some style guide that says it's okay, but most of them say it's not okay, and that you need the 4th dot. Anyway, that's a relatively picky one. The major things here are he changed wordings twice. 2 changes of the actual words, not the punctuation. This next one, quoting Wheeler. And David simply changed the quote quite a bit in terms of the wording. So you can find what he actually wrote on the internet. Here it is. It's a photo of the text, like a scan. So I had to type in the actual text. At my more details thing, I think I typed in. Anyways, oh no, I wrote what he actually wrote was, and I quote it right here. So David deleted the word so compelling, and he took the we grasp it, and he put it before the dashes. But if we go here, you can see, where is it? Here, we grasp it is right here, and it comes after the dash, not before. So after the dash, and there's this so compelling. Then you go to David's version, and the we grasp it is now before the dash, and the so compelling is just left out. So he's cutting words out, moving words around. It's just a misquote. Okay, next one. Feynman said, science is what we've learned about how to keep from fooling ourselves. I actually did a video, part 10, focused on this quote, so I'm not going to go into much detail on it. But in short, Feynman didn't say that. There's no documentation of him ever saying it. It just seems made up. It is on the internet on sites that have Feynman quotes and no sources. There's a very similar misquote on a Feynman quotes page that complains about lots and lots of misquotes. It is similar to stuff he said in Cargo Cult Science. It's one of the reasons people don't catch things necessarily is it sounds like something Feynman would have said. It is similar to things he actually said. I don't think Feynman would disagree with it. But it sounds nicer than what Feynman actually said. Like, his actual wording doesn't make quite as good of a one-sentence quote. Anyway, it seems to have come from this article called Magical Thinking from the year 2000, which has that exact text, which is one of the ways you can figure out where something came from, is when the text does not come from an original source and exactly matches, then they may have had the same non-original source. So it seems to have come from this article, where it says, as the physicist Richard Feynman put it, science is what we've learned about how to keep from fooling ourselves. So this is not a quote, but the wording makes it sound like it is a quote. Like, as he put it, makes it sound like it's going to be a quote, but then there's no quote marks. So I think this author knew it wasn't a quote, didn't put quote marks around it, but people read this, thought it was a quote, and quoted it with quote marks without giving this Magical Thinking article as the source. They just say Richard Feynman is the source. But they got it from this article, I think. So I think that's where it's spread from. And then David just found some webpage on the internet and copied the quote and thought it was fine without knowing where it came from, I guess. And anyways, it is now in a couple books that cite it as quoted in BOI. So they're giving BOI as the source to legitimize spreading it further. And I found a different book that said, it has a footnote that says, I could not find a source for this quote. And it's like, okay, if you looked for a source and you couldn't find one, why did you put it in your book? Just don't use it. What is wrong with people? You know it is an unsourced quote. Don't quote it. Putting a footnote and saying, like, this quote is made up does not make it okay to put a quote in your book. The wording was worse than that, too. He said something like, I couldn't find the exact text in an original Feynman source, which makes it sound like it's some sort of detail issue, when the actual issue is it's just a misquote that you found on the internet, and then you tried to look it up, and you couldn't find it, and then you wanted to use it anyways because you liked it. And Feynman said similar things. Just quote something he actually said. They're not hard to get. Okay, next one. Myth of the Framework. This is a Popper quote. So here's the book. I have this in paper as well. I have all the books open on my screen in paper, and I checked the paper version of this to make sure, because ebooks are not always reliable, although the scans usually are. Like, it's the OCR'd versions that you have to be a bit more careful with. They are more likely to have errors, whereas if it's just photographs of an actual paper book, it's basically about as reliable as a paper book. Anyway, so this is from page 7, is where it starts. So I'll just scroll down a bit. So it starts right here on this word, the. Only one word on page 7, but it starts there. So the beginning is... So that, and then it goes all the way to itself. And then David puts ellipsis where it's just a period, so that's wrong. And then he doesn't skip. He just starts with the next sentence immediately. See, the I contend is from right here. So he cut out the words in fact with no ellipsis. This ellipsis does not apply to this sentence down here. Like, this is wrong. So he's cutting out the in fact. He has an ellipsis in the wrong place. Like, this ellipsis should be down here where the words are cut out, not up here where no words were cut out. David lost the italics, so instruction without is italicized here, and so is instruction from within. But it gets worse. So I contend that there is no such thing as instruction from without the structure, says Popper. More missing italics. But anyways, here's where that goes to, like right here. Matches right here. So what Popper has here is a comma, and then lots more writing. What David has here is a period, and then we do not discover. And where is we do not discover? It's not here, it's not here. It is, like, on the next page. So we switch sections to section 5, and it is down here somewhere. We do not discover. It's right here in the middle of this other paragraph on a different page. And David, no ellipsis or anything, just continues with we do not discover. So yeah, it was comma, multiple paragraphs, section change, then in the middle of a different paragraph we do not discover. David just has it right there. So totally wrong. Probably taken from this old TCS website that had a similar misquote, but it's not exactly the same. For example, this one says Lamarckian with a no C. It's just a K with no C, which is wrong. The original and the BOI version have CK. So it seems like he took it off this old website and then made edits to it without ever checking the original. Like he fixed the typo in Lamarckian, but then he left other errors in and never compared it to the book. And it's really problematic to take a quote from a secondary source and then make edits to it without checking the original, because you're missing the context. And maybe when you change Lamarckian, maybe there was a typo in the original. Maybe Popper spelled it wrong. So you have to check the original to know before you can make an edit. So anyway, this one's really bad. Okay, then there's the chemical scum one. So BOI says that Hawking said that humans are just a chemical scum on the surface of a typical planet that's in orbit around a typical star on the outskirts of a typical galaxy. You may remember this from David's 2005 TED Talk. Came out well before BOI. And the BOI quote seems to be based on David's own TED Talk, but not based on something Hawking ever wrote. Alan Forster checked 5 different books: The Large-Scale Structure of Space-Time, A Brief History of Time, The Grand Design, The Nature of Space and Time, and The Universe in a Nutshell, and was not able to find the quote. It seems made up. So there's a similar quote that Hawking actually said, which David quoted in The Fabric of Reality. It is from the TV show Reality on Our Rocks Beyond Our Ken from 1995, and it is quoted in multiple places on the internet, as well as in Fabric of Reality. And it's kind of similar, but it doesn't have typical repeated 3 times. It says something about suburbs. Here it is. The human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. So the meaning is pretty similar, but this is like a reworded one that's meant to sound nice with this triple typical. Like this one has moderate-sized, and then average, and then suburb of one among 100 billion. So each of those kind of means typical or nothing special. But they're all worded in different ways, and David changed it to say typical 3 times so it sounds nice and it's more memorable. And it seems to just be a made-up fake misquote. And now people quote David. But if you search the internet, there's nothing about this quote that doesn't mention David in some way. It's all related to David. Whereas with the real quote, you can just search it and you find stuff that is unrelated to David saying Hawking said it. I was not able to actually watch the TV show to verify exactly what Hawking said, but I'm pretty confident anyways. Because many different sources, including David's first book, say Hawking said one thing, and then BOI and David's TED Talk, and nothing else that isn't getting it from them, says Hawking said the other thing. And it doesn't seem like an accidental misquote. He's making it sound nice. I think it's partially accidental, but it's partially not. There seems to be some sort of bias to misquote things so that they're more catchy and elegant and stuff. Okay, so there's this Horgan quote. BOI says, Horgan believed that science has the ability to resolve questions objectively. Now, David put quote marks around resolve questions, so you'd expect resolve questions to be a quote from the book. It is not, however. Oh, and when I say from the book, he was talking about a specific Horgan book, I think. Anyways, so I looked in the Horgan book, and there's more details at a link if you want, but what Horgan said was pose questions and resolve them. And DD quoted resolve questions, but you don't see the text resolve questions here. You could have resolve square bracket questions and square bracket and you'd be fine, because what Horgan wrote was resolve them. And questions and them are different words. And this may seem picky and pedantic, but quote marks mean this is exact. That's what it's supposed to mean. If you don't want to use the exact wording, just don't use quote marks. This is wrong. This one's interesting because it's only a 2-word quote. And it's the kind of thing that I'm not sure if people even recognize it as a quote the way they do when you quote a paragraph. When there's a paragraph quote, people are like, okay, he's quoting from this book and it should be the same and blah, blah, blah. When it's a 2-word quote, it's still a quote. Horgan should have said those 2 words in a row, which he did not. He actually said those 2 words somewhere else in the book while talking about something else, but that doesn't make it okay either. Whereas this section is the one David was referencing. David quoted something else from this section, right beforehand, and the context and the meaning all fit for it to be a quote from this section, except the words don't fit. then for the other section, the context and meaning and everything else is all wrong, except the 2 words resolve questions happen to have been used. Okay, next one, Paley, Natural Theology. Right, so David put appearance of design in quotes, but that is not a quote from Paley's Natural Theology. So that is bad. It's not entirely clear that it's supposed to be a quote from the book, but if it's not a quote from the book, what's it a quote from? It's confusing, it's problematic. And a lot of people are going to read it as being a quote from the book. So here's another Paley quote. D.D. changed some words. So for example, Paley wrote anything as 2 words, and David changed it to anything as 1 word. Paley wrote an use, and David changed it to a use. If you want to make changes like this, use square brackets. That's what they're there for. David quoted things from 2 different chapters and just stuck an ellipse in the middle and seems to think that's okay. I do not agree. He removed a comma near the end that makes it harder to read. He changes punctuation a lot, which is a sign that he's changing things on purpose and thinks it's okay to, which it's not. But in this particular, most of the time when he changes punctuation, it still reads okay. Like, it's about as good as before or better. Sometimes his punctuation is better than the original. But in this case, his punctuation is worse than the original. He took out a comma that made it easier to read and made it make more sense. It's arrangement, disposition of parts, subserviency of means to an end, relation of instruments to a use, imply the presence of intelligence in mind. So it's a list of all these different things, and then it's imply this thing at the end. And so in the original, there's a comma here to separate the list from the thing that applies to everything on the list. And then David took out that comma for some reason. And now it's hard to read and confusing. So here's another one. Hawking, television could come out of a naked singularity. And Alan looked into this quote and just couldn't find it anywhere. Looked in 5 books, searched the web. Just no trace of this quote actually being said by Hawking. And David doesn't give a source. He doesn't give page numbers. Which he should do. He should give sources and page numbers for his quotes. Or, page numbers if it's paper copies. But if he wants to quote electronic things and give links, that's cool too, that are searchable. Okay, so here's a Hofstadter quote. And Hofstadter ended the paragraph with a large bag of isolated tricks, dash, kludges and hacks, as they say. David changed it to be isolated tricks, comma, kludges and hacks. So it makes it a list instead of things separated by a dash. So when there's a dash, it makes kludges and hacks a restatement of isolated tricks, a different way to say the same thing. Whereas in Didi's version, it's saying there's a large bag with 3 things in it, isolated tricks, kludges, and hacks. Whereas Hofstadter was saying there's a large bag with 1 thing in it, isolated tricks. And then the isolated tricks are also called kludges and hacks, as they say. And David cut out the as they say and changed the punctuation, which changed the meaning. So that one's really bad. Here's another one. So this one is some U.S. representatives from a long time ago, and it is in the congressional record. Justin looked this up for me and found it in the congressional record, and David changed the words. So in the original, it is by inspiration, and in David's quote, it is to inspiration. How does that happen? He's just changing the words. Is it a typo? Well, it seems like he got the misquote from a book. He got it from a secondary source. He didn't say what secondary source he got it from. And that is what happened. So he's not actually quoting the congressional record. He's quoting some book that misquoted the congressional record. And he's not checking into it. He's just trusting his random book. And he doesn't tell us what book it is. So it's very hard to find out what happened. He also wrote this but. No ellipses. But what he's actually doing here is skipping multiple sentences. And then the next word is but. So it's not even a change. Anyway, so he likely got it from this book called Fair Representation because there were 2 different quotes that are both in this, and the misquote matches with wording. So good job, Justin, figuring that out. Okay, so this next one. This is Susan Blackmore stuff. She wrote the book, The Meme Machine, and in the book, she talks about Machiavellian intelligence, which is in the index. And she cites in her bibliography a book with Machiavellian intelligence in the name, actually 2 of them. And she writes things like an influential version of social theory is the Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis. And she gives a cite, and nothing extraordinary or anything. But David decides to say Machiavelli and hypothesis, not Machiavellian intelligence, but Machiavellian hypothesis, just different wording, and he sticks it in quotes. And you might think he was getting it from Blackmore's book, but no. And you might think it was like the standard name, but no. You can go to Wikipedia, and it is Machiavellian intelligence. That's the name of the theory. So David's just giving the wrong name and putting it in quotes. There are books with the right name. There's a Wikipedia article, Blackmore's book, which David read, has the right name, and he just gives the wrong name in quotes. And he's, it's in quotes, so not okay. It seems like he just read Blackmore's book, then misremembered it, didn't look it up, and put quote marks. And if you're just going to go by memory, don't put quote marks. Okay, Michelson quote. So Dede didn't give a source for this, but it is in Michelson's own book, Light Waves and Their Uses from 1903. So the speaker himself wrote down what he said in his own book. And this is what he wrote, and Dede quotes it wrong. So he says that what he said was, stuff will justify our statement that, quote, our future discoveries may be looked for in the sixth place of decimals, unquote. So he had this in quotes himself. So he's quoting himself, and then there's nested quotes inside that. But Dede cut those quotes out. So just changed it. All right, next one, Fabric of Reality, David's own book. So here's Fabric, and here's Beginning of Infinity, because in Beginning of Infinity, David quotes Fabric of Reality. And so we're going to compare them. So this should find it. You search for a string, and good, they matched enough for that to work. Sometimes you get false negatives when you do searches, by the way, because of things like this right here, which is a page number, or in this particular copy on the left, the Fabric one, some of the quote marks are straight up and down, whereas in BOI you've got the angled ones, so then they don't match when you do a text search. So you have to be careful because you can get misleading results. However, if you go through carefully, you can find actual changes when you compare them. And I compared these in paper as well to make sure. I checked paper versions of both books, wrote down the page numbers for them. And so what are the errors? Dede quotes, understand why they're there. The original reads, understand why it is there. So he just changed some words. He changed it is to they are. He also dropped the italics, or added the italics. Yeah, this BOI has the italics, Fabric doesn't. BOI says pursuing that inquiry, but Fabric said this inquiry. So he changed a word. Dede says in BOI, understand why that copper atom is where it is. But in Fabric, in the original, it says understand fully why. So he cut a word out. So he's just changing the wording over and over again. And it keeps going. In this quote from BOI, he has you in square brackets. But what actually happened is he skipped 2 sentences. So what you're supposed to use when you skip text is called an ellipsis. It's the 3 dots. Square brackets are for when you modify things, when you make little edits and changes. If you want to change the wording of something, you can put your wording in square brackets as long as it's accurate to the meaning. Whereas if it's not in square brackets, it's supposed to be an exact quote. So David is using square brackets for the wrong purpose. He skipped text and then he used square brackets for some reason. When you use square brackets, the text you put in the square brackets is supposed to replace any text that you're leaving out. You don't get to just leave a bunch of text out and then use square brackets. You have to have ellipses when you're leaving things out. And square brackets means you're rewording it your own way or writing notes of your own. Right, so he left out 2 different italics. Oh, and his ellipsis was wrong because it was at the end of a sentence, so he should have 4 dots, not 3. So he doesn't even quote himself accurately, and this is one quote with 6 errors. So that is the misquotes in BOI. There were some other smaller things, but that was a lot. Seriously, that's a lot. That is, a lot of books are pretty bad at quoting, but that's pretty bad. That's up there as noticeably bad. It's there's some books that are not perfect at quoting, but I'd be okay, it's still better than most books. But this, I wouldn't say better than most books. I'd just say this is pretty bad quoting. Fabric is not as bad, by the way. There's a noticeable difference, which might mean something. Maybe he got worse over time, or sloppy over time, or more interested in making his quotes sound nice to readers over time. like maybe there's a bias. He in Fabric he has page numbers on some of his quotes, and in BOI, I don't know if there's any page numbers in BOI. There usually aren't any. So why is that? I think most of his readers that he's trying to attract are the type of people who think page numbers are just, oh my god, more numbers. Like, why do I have to read all this crap? Like that kind of person. Anyway, in Fabric, there's this problematic one I mentioned briefly. So he quotes St. Augustine from Confessions, and he doesn't say which translation. So I checked a translation, and then his wording did not match the one I checked, but maybe it matches some other English translation. So it's a problem to quote from a book that has many different translations and not say which translation you're quoting, because how is someone supposed to check it? Like, am I supposed to check all 10 or so versions? Because that's way too much work. That's not reasonable. So you should give a more specific source if you're quoting something where there are a bunch of different versions. So I don't know if his quote matches one of the translations. It very well could, because it was pretty similar to the translation I looked in. But his sourcing was poor. Anyway, that was Fabric, minor thing. So Didi wrote this article, Not Merely the Finest TV Documentary Series Ever Made. You can click on it, it's on Nautilus, and here it is. He wrote 2 different articles on Nautilus. Anyways, yeah, article, it's supposed to be all like fancy and prestigious and nice and whatever. And he quotes, so as Karl Popper put it, we humans can, quote, let our ideas die in our place, end quote. Popper said similar things 3 times. I found 3 sources that were similar, but Popper never used that wording. I believe that Didi just relies on his memory for this quote, because Didi has quoted the same quote several different places, and he doesn't always use the same wording. So it seems like he just makes up a new wording each time. So for example, in this other article also from Nautilus, same publication, he used a different quote with theories instead of ideas, which is better because Popper prefers the word theories. So ideas is just wrong. Popper didn't say that. And it's not just Didi. His associate, Chiara Marletto, quoted, let our ideas die in our place, which is a misquote. Anyway, what did Popper actually say? In Myth of the Framework, he said, by criticizing our theories, we can let our theories die in our stead. This is why I started looking into it, is because I thought I remembered that it had the word stead instead of place. So I searched, and lo and behold, it was stead. But then I found, in Search of a Better World, Popper wrote, now we can let our theories die in our place. So that's actually pretty similar to what Didi quoted, except that it has theories, not ideas. So Didi's quote is just wrong. And also, in this other one, Natural Selection and the Emergence of Mind, Popper wrote, let our conjectures, our theories, die in our stead. So it's stead again. It's always theories all 3 times. But 2 times it's stead and 1 time it's place. And the wording's a little different on some of them. Anyway, Didi gets stuff wrong. Sarah was David's co-founder for Taking Children Seriously, and she misquoted William Godwin. So I mentioned that as well. So she gives the condition of a ellipsis slave in the West Indies is in many respects preferable to that of the useful son of a freeborn European, blah, blah, blah. And she misquoted because she changed the words of its grading to of grading. So she just deleted the word its. And also, where this ... is, she's not actually skipping words appropriately. The original said Negro slave, and that's a quote. And it had a hyphen, and I don't think you can use an ellipsis to replace half of a word. This is a hyphenated word. Like, she's not skipping any independent words. She's skipping a partial word. So what she should have done was written slave in square brackets to indicate a change. The word slave is a reasonable representation of the term Negro slave. It can replace it. Whereas an ellipsis means you're skipping ahead, and that's not what she's doing. And anyways, why did she change that? She's trying to sanitize it and hide what Godwin actually wrote, which I think is really problematic. And the whole quote is really problematic because it's downplaying how bad slavery was. And then on top of that, Sarah's like, well, I like this quote downplaying how bad slavery was. I just don't want to say Negro. So she cut that out to try to hide like what was going on, that to disassociate it from the type of slavery people don't like. And people are just like, a slave in the West Indies. And most people are like, I have no idea what the West Indies is. So they don't know what she's talking about. And it makes it seem more okay to them. Right, and the Myth of the Framework quote that I talked about earlier, the Popper one. So it was wrong in BOI, It was wrong in a similar way on the old TCS website. And then on Sarah's current TCS website, or not TCS website, on Sarah's current personal website, she has the same passage from Myth of the Framework, except quoted differently. And it is closer to correct. It doesn't have the giant errors in BOI. However, she did take the word that and change it to which, so also just wrong. I don't know what's wrong with these people. They can't type in quotes correctly or something. I think there's multiple different things wrong. I don't think it's one thing. So some smaller things. DD often doesn't give sources. He uses ellipsis screwy. He'll often ellipsis between different paragraphs and then make it look like it's a single paragraph. He'll change capitalization and punctuation with no markers to indicate a change. Sometimes he leaves out italics. He doesn't seem to have a consistent policy for periods going inside or outside of quotes. So in BOI, I did a search, and there were 188 instances of a single close quote followed by a period. There were 88 instances of a period followed by a single close quote. So he just kind of goes back and forth between them. So he often ends quotes with a period inside the quote marks when the original sentence doesn't end there. And according to some style guidelines, if it's not the end of a sentence, you should put the period outside of the quotes, because there's no period within the quote. So I looked at some guidelines, like, is what GD is doing okay according to most people's opinion, not just mine? So SUNY Empire State College says, remember that when you do choose to use direct quotations, you need to retain the exact wording, spelling, capitalization, and punctuation of the original source. So everything just has to be exactly the same. That is the standard idea of how quotes work. What David is doing is just not acceptable. So this is just some state college. David went to Cambridge and Oxford. He's supposed to be fancy and have high standards and stuff, right? You might think so. Well, Oxford University Press says, quoted matter must reflect the original source exactly in spelling, punctuation, and capitalization. So David changes all those things around. It's just not okay. And they also have to be sourced, which he doesn't do either. I found a University of Oxford style guide that says place any punctuation which does not belong to the quote outside the quote marks. Closing punctuation can be at the end of the quote is also the end of your sentence. So this one is claiming that if you're ending your sentence, you can put the period inside the quote marks, but other ones say you can't. For example, Cambridge says a full stop is used outside the quote marks if the quote is only part of a sentence. So it says don't do that. So there's some disagreement about some style things, but then David does blatantly wrong things, like cutting out commas and changing words. Cambridge also says always source quotations. So David apparently disagrees. Okay, moving on a bit. Next issue, taking credit from Karl Popper. So in The Fabric of Reality, Chapter 3. So what I did is I took the book, The Fabric of Reality, and I searched for Chapter 3 and I deleted everything above it. And then I searched for Chapter 4 and I deleted everything from there downwards. So this is a document with only Chapter 3 and nothing else. And the point is you can now search it. So you can type in Popper and get 2 results. Now, that is problematic because this chapter is all about Popper's idea. This is like the key chapter of how does Popper's ideas work. It's like the critical rationalism chapter. It's called problem solving. And, this ending, the whole process resembles biological evolution. He's explaining evolutionary epistemology. He's explaining Popper. And that's the focus of the chapter. And it talks about ideas like induction and problem and criticism in science and experimental tests. So it's like a summary of Popper. But Popper's name is in the chapter 2 times. So he says, prevailing theory of scientific knowledge, which in its modern form is due largely to philosopher Karl Popper. So he's sort of giving general credit to Popper for the field, but he's not giving specific credit for anything in his book to Popper. And then down here, he said Popper has called this his theory that knowledge can grow only by conjecture and refutation in the manner of figure 3.3 in evolutionary epistemology. So he gives Popper credit for this one little thing, calling it an evolutionary epistemology. But the entire rest of the chapter just doesn't give Popper credit. And so I will give you a specific example of why that's bad. It is... it's not going to show up because it's an image. So it's the figures. Figures 3.2 and 3.3. I'll just show you Popper's version. I have a paper copy, but... oh wait, I have a PDF. Just a second. Here you go. This is a scan of the fabric of reality. So you can see figure 3.2, the problem-solving process. Problem, conjectures, conjectured solutions, criticism, replace. Oh, it's not a very good scan. Like, the end is cut off. Okay, let me grab a paper copy of the book, and I will read it to you. Just because I want to read what it says in the last part of the diagram. Okay, here we are. Page 64. The last part of the diagram right here says new problem. Anyway, that's what it says. And then this last one is also new problem. Anyway, so these diagrams, these schemas, were very memorable to me. I thought they were a good summary of how this stuff works. And I knew that they were based on Popper for a long time. But what I did not know was that it never says in the book that David got these from Popper. He reworded them, but the idea is out of Popper. So here's Popper's version. Problem 1 goes to, you start with problem 1, and then the next step is tentative theories, the next step is error elimination, and the next step is problem 2. So there's a repeating thing with problem at the beginning and new problem at the end. That's what problem 2 and problem 1 are. In the middle, Popper has tentative theories, in other words, conjecture. He has error elimination, which David took error elimination, he split it up into criticism and then like acting on the criticism, replacing the wrong theories. So you come up with criticism and then you eliminate the wrong ideas. And Popper just calls both of those together error elimination, where you look for errors and then get rid of the errors. So it's the same schema, and the idea of having a diagram or schema or whatever with arrows and having steps and the arrows and stuff is straight from Popper. And David is just taking credit for it. There's no credit in this book that he copied the diagram from Popper, modified the wording. So I was pretty unhappy about that when I noticed. I knew for many years it was from Popper, like I've read this book. When I first read Fabric, I had never read Popper, so I didn't know. And then when I read Popper, I was like, I read this, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that from Fabric chapter 3, but I didn't remember that Fabric didn't give credit. So then recently, I searched chapter 3 for the word Popper, found it was only there twice, and I was like, wait, it should be there like 20 times. That's the chapter with the most Popper stuff, I think. And so then I specifically looked at these figures because I thought they were the thing that's most clearly just straight out of Popper's book. And they are not credited, so that's really bad. And it is not the only problem along these lines. So David does a weird mix. He's called himself Footnotes to Popper and acted really humble, but then in chapter 3 of Fabric, where are all the footnotes saying this is from Popper, this is from Popper, this is from Popper? He's not connecting his work to Popper enough. He doesn't say, here is my diagram, which is a minor modification of Popper's diagram that he made first. He just says, here's my diagram, here's how I explain it. So people would think that he did more than he did. And so in 2016, David wrote a paper called The Logic of Experimental Tests, particularly of Everettian Quantum Theory. So physics paper, at least partially. Free online. And in it, David writes something that takes credit from Popper. That's why it's here. It's as relevant as the same kind of issue. So David says, I'll just skip a bit. The asymmetry between refutation, which is tentative, and support, which is non-existent, in scientific methodology is better understood this way, meaning David's way, by regarding theories as explanations. So he's saying that's his idea, instead of through Popper's own argument from the logic of predictions. So he's saying Popper gave one argument, and then David gave this different, better argument. And this is extremely misleading and wrong, because what actually happened is Popper gave both arguments. Popper gave more than one argument. Popper gave this argument that is less important, and he gave the more important argument as well. And David gave nothing original here at all. He's just following Popper, but what he's presenting it as is that he has improved on Popper. So he's bragging and lying. He's tricking people into thinking that Popper gave one argument and David gave a better one, but actually Popper just gave both. The idea that refutation is tentative, that is from Popper. The idea that support is non-existent, that is from Popper. These are not David's contributions. And then he'll go and say he's humble and thinks he's footnotes to Popper, but then in a paper, he's telling people that he did better than Popper, that he improved on Popper, when there's no improvement here. So Popper talks about this stuff all the time, but I'll give you one example. This is from Conjectures and Refutations. And you can search the book on words like tentative and explanation and support and see that Popper talked about these things. But so Popper wrote, for its scientific theory, dash, and explanatory theory, dash. That means it's a restatement. Popper thinks an explanatory theory is a restatement of the term scientific theory. Is, if anything, an attempt to solve a scientific problem. That is to say, a problem concerned or connected with the discovery of an explanation. And then footnote, and the footnote is to Popper's own work where he writes more about this stuff. So you can see here that Popper understood scientific theories as explanations, but David is trying to correct Popper and say, like, I have a better idea. Scientific theories are only approximately modeled as propositions, but they are precisely explanations. David's like, the idea that science is about explanations is my improvement on Popper, and it's not. Popper said that. It's right here. Scientific theory means explanatory theory, according to Popper. So David is taking credit in this academic paper from Popper completely unfairly, just like he did in Fabric of Reality. So, yeah, I'm not happy about that. And DD doesn't just do this stuff himself, he gets his associates to do it. So his co-founder of TCS, Sarah Fitzclarence, wrote that Popper invented a philosophy of science and that David Deutsch and his TCS philosophy had extended Popper's epistemology to apply outside of science. That was completely unfair. Popper was never writing like something limited to science. And he knew that, and he said so. Popper was seeking a general theory of knowledge that applied outside of science and also to science, and he thought science made a particularly good example and a good field of study, but he was looking for how does knowledge work in general. So the idea of applying it to specific other areas that aren't science is not a new, original, significant contribution at all. Sarah even said that, quote, David has the greatest mind ever to have existed. Now this is a bit of an odd comment because no one, including David, maybe not including Sarah, I don't know, but no one reasonable, as far as I know, believes that David is the best physicist. Like, David is a physicist, that's his career, primarily. But is he the best physicist to ever have existed? No. He's like, kind of towards the top. He's pretty good. But definitely not the best. I've talked with him about this, and from memory, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but my recollection is he said that none of the physicists alive today are first rate, that some of the past physicists who are dead are better than any of the current physicists. So he certainly does not think he was the best physicist ever, and no one else does either. Like, no one's going around saying David is a better physicist than Einstein or Feynman or whatever. So how exactly do you come to the conclusion that David has the greatest mind ever to have existed when I'm skeptical that even Sarah herself would call him the best physicist ever? So how do you come to that conclusion if he is only footnotes to Popper and not the best physicist? You come to that conclusion by thinking that he's better than Popper. You think that he actually improved on Popper a lot. That is how you reach that kind of idea. That is what David's associate, his co-founder, is telling the world, is that he is better than Popper. And she says things like, quote, people should not speak of Popper, but of Deutsch. Because Deutsch is the one who applied epistemology to educational theory, which is not accurate either. Popper did that himself, which Sarah even admits and contradicts herself right next to it. Anyways, now Sarah, his co-founder, his close associate, his friend for many, many years, who moved to live about a mile away from David. She moved to a different city in order to be near David so they could hang out more. So close associates, IRL friends, etc. Also, allegedly, David has ghostwritten a bunch of her stuff. So when she says things like David has the greatest mind ever to have existed, I mean, maybe David wrote that. Probably not. Doesn't actually sound like his style. Like he wouldn't phrase it that way, I don't think. But it seems like what he wants some of his fans to think, and some of his fans do think it, and that's the kind of thing some of them will say. And he's not contradicting Sarah. He's not saying, hey, Sarah, stop. No. Instead, what he's doing is writing academic papers where he is absolutely screwing Popper over and pretending that explanations are his own idea that Popper didn't know about or something. And he like takes Popper's diagram and rewords it and acts like that's new. Anyway, the main point is BOI has like a dozen misquotes in it. I don't know, that was just a guess. There were a lot of them. So the book is full of errors. My original plan for this video series was to finish chapter 1 and then reconsider what to do. But I'm just going to stop here. The misquotes are not okay, and I'm done promoting the book. So on this channel, I will do new philosophy videos and explain something else about philosophy later. But I'm done reading BOI. And final comments. Don't trust quotes from most people in general. Lots of people misquote. It's not safe. Check. Sometimes they're right. Like a decent proportion of quotes are accurate. But check for yourself if you're going to spread it. If you're going to remember it and it's going to stand out in your mind. If it's important to you, check for yourself. And if you like what I'm doing, go to criticalfallibilism.com and click on subscribe. And you can get free emails from me when there's new stuff. You can just go here and click on these and learn about my stuff. These are classics, which means that I'm linking to stuff I made in the past, some of my best stuff, highlights, curated stuff from the past. And there are often summaries. So I have like a short explanation of paths forward, and at the bottom, a bunch of links to things I already made that are good. So, criticalfallibilism.com. All right, bye.